booktube. Hello there, booktube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. I didn't plan this next bit, but I've got no rhythm. Today I'm going to do a review about Rachel Cusk's Outline. This is my first book by Rachel Cusk, and I have this paperback edition, which is, I think, maybe the first UK paperback edition, and it's got a dreadfully ugly cover. I felt bad for it. I picked this up on eBay quite cheaply, eBay in the UK, and I specifically picked it up for this ugly cover because I felt sorry for it, because Outline is the first part of I think, a loose trilogy, all three of which are published now. At least when the second one came out, and maybe when the third one came out, they republished them all with some really fancy artsy-fartsy drawing on it. And I think Outline has a sort of a drawing of a naked woman on the cover, which is quite racy. But this is really ugly. For those who judge books by a cover, I felt bad for it, right? So I read it, and I decided I was going to read Cusk. She was, I think, longlisted for the Booker Prize last year. Is that right? But I remember her first book coming out. I think her first book was called Saving Agnes. So Rachel Cusk, a couple of years older than me. So when her first book came out, it won what was then the Whitbread First Novel of the Year. So the Whitbread then became the Costa. It's now since defunct. But there were 4 or 5 awards, one of them for Best Novel of the Year and one of them Best First Novel. So her first book won the Best First Novel. I think a subsequent book was also shortlisted for what was then the Whitbread and then became the Costa. But I had never read her, and decided that I would, because the recent one, which is not part of the trilogy, that was longest last year, got rave reviews, and I really thought I should go back. I think CJ was also a big fan of from CJ Reads. CJ Reads was bigging up Cusk, and I decided I really should go back and read it. So I took this on holiday with me. We were in a couple of weeks ago. We went down to Sharm el Sheikh in the southern Sinai. So for the first time in history, I think you can now fly direct from Tel Aviv to Sharm el Sheikh. So my wife and I spend a week, what they call in Hebrew, bet and gov, which just means belly and back, because that's all you do in the sun, just flip from one side to the other, by the pool. And I read this by the pool, so maybe not the perfect read, but it turns out that the book is set mostly in Greece, which is where we went on a holiday last year. So there is that sense of sort of holiness. The narrator has gone to Greece to teach in a creative writing program, only for a week or two. So it's everything is sort of out, not quite permanent, and not quite really fitting in somewhere. She's gone there to be there temporarily. She's not really going to have a major impact on the lives of the people she interacts with there, and there's that sense all the way through of, does this really matter, and is this a bit weightless? And that's the story that's being told, that sort of weightlessness of life and these relationships is a theme throughout the book, and I should talk about the book. It's not a plot-based book. It's a book about storytelling, and it's a book about people, and told with a sort of weirdly detached view of the world. We start off on the plane on her way to Greece to do this bit of teaching, and engages with the gentleman sitting next to her, and hears his story, and he starts telling about his life and his lost loves and broken marriage and relationship with his children, and we instantly, lots of things revealed by this third party, this other person that she's met, and she starts not to interrogate him in a confrontational way, but to, as she's taking in this information about this person, questioning, well, is that really true, what he's telling me? Do you think that really happened? And that story about the child being locked in the basement by his second wife, the stepmother of the child, do you think that really happened? Because she denied it, and he's and so as the stories are unfolding, we're already interrogating and questioning their integrity, and that continues all the way through. It's a series of meetings and conversations with people, and at each stage we're being told and given information and told stories. The people that she meets are telling her stories, and on occasion we hear a little bit about her own story, but not as much as we get about everyone else's. And each time is the question, well, is that really, is this a story or is this reality? And the big set piece in the middle of this is the class, when she finally gets to teach a class, and sets her students, and we hear a little bit about each of them, and just what they're wearing, or how pleased they are to be there, or what it means to them. And then she sets them each a task to go away and come back the next day with a story. And we go through one by one and hear these stories. And it's the way people tell stories, the stories that they tell, the way the stories have affected them. Did they fulfill it? Well, you asked me to tell a story about an animal, but did I really do that? And it ends up, it's a book about storytelling. It's not just a book about storytelling in a way that, say, Neil Gaiman writes about storytelling and interrogates the weird and wonderfulness of stories. This is a book about telling stories about oneself. It's about self-mythologizing, not telling myths and tales about unicorns and genies. This is about the almost use the word lies. It's not about lies, but it's about the stories and the myths that we create about our own identity and our own interactions with the world. And I just loved every minute of it. I guess the most similar thing I read recently would have been Jabal Lahiri's book Whereabouts. It's got that sense of detachment, that sense of not quite being involved and looking down, observing, but being further away actually makes the whole thing a bit more intimate, and just makes you lean in. It's like when someone talks very quietly and you actually have to lean in to what they're saying. And that's what Cusk is doing here. And it's a terrific bit of work to do that, to actually, for me as a first-time reader of this novelist, that I actually want to lean and say, what's happening? What are we really getting here? What's the story being told? And we learn very little about the narrator, which now makes me want to read the second in the trilogy, which I think is, it's not a narrative trilogy, but I think the narrator comes back and we get to see a bit of her. I don't know, I haven't read it, but my sense from the pre-blurb was you getting to know a little bit about her and her children who get brought up. Call her, there's one hilarious phone call she takes from her son in London, who seems to have got lost on the way to school. So there's real humour here, but again, always at that remove. There's a level of intimacy here that we get each of the characters that she meets and the stories they tell. We get to hear or know a lot about them through their eyes and through her listening to their stories. And I say this loop, this feedback loop of intimacy is generated despite the distance and the sort of clinical, almost like a therapist listening to someone else's story and say, okay, but is that what you meant, or did that really happen, or why was that important for you? There's that kind of questioning the integrity of each of these stories in ways that makes it either stronger, or that actually the integrity of the story isn't the important part. It's the way it was told. I'm sure I can't do it justice, but this was unexpected and a genuine delight. And my wife read it after me, and she got the exact same thing. We often have different tastes, but she doesn't bring books on holiday, and I brought 15 books on holiday, so she ends up reading the books that I brought. But she also got that sense of that sort of clinical distance, actually bringing you in and bringing you closer and making it more fascinating. There's so much going on here. It's beautifully written. Definitely going to read more Cusk. I should say one of the things that put Cusk on the radar back in, so her first novel I think is in the late 90s maybe, and then in 2003 she was named in Granta's 20 best British novelists. Is it under 40 or under 30? Whatever they do. Anyway, Granta, if you don't know, Granta is a British literary magazine, except it's not really a magazine. It's published once a quarter, and it's a great big book. And they've done, over the years, every 10 years, I think the first one was 1983, and then there's 1993 and 2003. I think they did 2013 as well, where they name 20 great British writers. And then what's interesting is to go back and see whether these names made it. it so happens that recently I was in a second-hand bookstore and I found that edition of Granta. This is the Best of Young British Novelists 2003, and sure enough, well, I can name some of the other novelists that are in here. I think several of which will be familiar. So Sarah Waters, Monica Ali, whose latest novel is out. I read the first one, I haven't read it since then. Dan Rhodes, Toby Litt, Rachel Cusk, we said. David Mitchell is in here. L. Kennedy, down at the bottom, Zadie Smith, and the story Martha Martha, which I read last year for the first time as a short story. Great short story. So these are all so represented in the book as short stories from each of the authors who are listed as the best of British young novelists. Here is Rachel Cusk one. Actually, there's an advert for Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, who is also named. A short story called After Caravaggio's Sacrifice of Isaac by Rachel Cusk. There's a great little author picture of Cusk, and then a short story that is maybe 4 or 5 pages long, which I haven't read yet, but I will. And if anyone's interested in me, one day I'll do a video about this and just go through all the authors in there and the stories that are in this, because it's kind of fascinating. Look back 20 years ago now. It must be coming up for the 2023 Best of British Authors, and interesting to go back. This is 20 years. I've read something by, out of the 21, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I've read work by 11 of these best British novelists of 2003. And sometimes when I'm looking for backlist, this is the kind of thing I go and will pick up something by one of these other writers that I haven't read before. So that's super interesting. So that's Rachel Cusk. Outline, really, really just a delightful backlist discovery that's going to make me go back and read certainly the rest of the trilogy and probably some other stuff by Cusk as well. Outline, Rachel Cusk, love it. Thanks. Bye.